Hello, this is Dr. Robert Barney. During this brief session, I'm going to be talking with you about how to create a reference list. We'll be using the 7th edition of the APA manual. There are a couple of important general rules to keep in mind when you build your reference list. First off, if this is part of a student or a professional paper, you'll want to make sure that your references are included on a separate sheet towards the end of your document. This sheet needs to be titled References, not Works Cited and not Bibliography, and all of the sources that you cite in the body of your paper need to be included in this list of references. Another important point to consider is that all of the sources that are referred to or cited in the body of your paper need to be included in this list of references. It's not appropriate to include references that you have not actually cited in your paper. All of your references need to be listed alphabetically by the last name of your first author for each publication. Make sure that when you include the author's names, you only spell out their last name entirely and only include initials for first and middle names. Now, one commonly used type of reference are articles from periodic journals. When you cite an article from a periodic journal, you need to make sure that you include the author's last name, followed by the initials for first and middle names. In parentheses, you'll want to make sure to include the publication year. You'll also want to make sure that you list the title of the article from the periodic journal. Only capitalize the first word of this title, as well as proper nouns. Next, you'll want to make sure to include the title of the periodic journal, as well as the volume number of the journal, and include all of that information in italics. You need to make sure that you're including the issue number. In the past, the APA manual has allowed you to include the issue number only in certain cases, but according to the 7th edition, you always now need to include the issue number. This issue number should not be in italics. Finally, you'll need to make sure to include the page numbers for periodic journal articles. You also need to make sure to include the DOI for the article. You'll see an example of what this looks like from a paper that I've actually written and had published within the past couple of years. Sometimes you're going to have periodic journal articles with more than one author. When you have two authors, you want to make sure to include both names of the authors. Keep those in the order in which they are published as part of the paper itself. Don't reorganize them. Make sure that when you include these, you utilize an ampersand. And you'll see an example of what this looks like. When you have works that include 3 to 20 authors, you want to make sure to include all of those last names. Now, if you have a journal article that has been written by more than 20 authors, so 21 and above, you want to make sure to list the first 20 authors by name and initial, then apply 3 dots or an ellipsis, and end with the last author's name and initials. Another important type of publication that you would want to include as part of your reference list are books. These follow pretty much the same format as a periodic journal article, however with a couple of key differences. First off, you want to make sure to include the author's last name first, followed by initials, as well as the year of publication in parentheses. So this stays pretty much the same. However, the title of the book is the only title that you want to include. This should be listed in italics. After this, you can include the publisher's name, and if this is an online book, include the DOI or the URL for the book. Now, I've given you a couple of examples of what these references might look like. These were a couple of books that have been written by colleagues of mine. The first is an authored book that was written by 3 authors. This gives you an example of what happens when there is more than one edition of a book. So in this case, we have a second edition, and that second edition is listed immediately after the title in parentheses. In the same way, if you have an edited book, you could also include the information about the editor immediately after the editor's name. There are a couple of other important textual works that you could include as part of your references. This includes magazine articles. The first example is a magazine article written by one of my colleagues. In this case, you could format this in much the same way that you would an academic journal article. However, there are a couple of key important differences. The first one that you should note is that you would want to include as much information about the date of that publication as possible. Since magazines come out often on a monthly basis, you could include the month, or if there is an actual date included, you could include the date as well. If you have an online newspaper article, it follows much the same format. In this case, you'll see not just the month of publication, but the day of publication. In both of these cases, you'll see that URLs have been included since these are online available articles, or if this is a print version, just include page numbers in their place. For more information about this, please make sure to refer to the APA manual, specifically chapter number 10, for additional information about those referenced articles. Finally, I want to talk with you briefly about legal references. This is important, especially in social sciences that operate within the policy arena. I've given you a couple of examples of how we should format legal references, including federal statutes, court cases, and government annual reports. Now, certainly there are many more references that should be included if they are cited in your paper. However, this highlights a couple of key variations of some of the different types of legal references that you may want to include as part of your paper. For more information about other legal references that could be included in the body of your paper and as part of your reference list, please refer to chapter number 11 of the 7th edition of the APA manual. A final thing that I want to note is that in your references, you'll want to make sure to list your references in hanging indentation format. You'll see that here under the last example. Your references should not be flush left, and they should not have first line indentation. APA formatting requires that they be listed as hanging indents.